Um, when I open up reports, we're going to see a list of our reports options. We're going to go ahead and start in this run reports section, but I do like to mention this really quickly as well. I do occasionally get asked, hey, how do I know if I have custom reports? Well, it's really simple. If you see this create report option, then that's a strong indication that you have this module. If you don't see that there, then there's a good chance that that doesn't that you don't currently have it. Okay, so that's just kind of one thing to keep in mind there. If you do have it, you should see create report. If you don't have it, there's a good chance you won't see create report there. Okay, we'll come back to that a little bit later. Let's go back in here to run reports for just a second. Maybe. Marcy, will you? Maybe it is there. I've just seen kind of a weird mouse-looking thing on my screen there. Okay, there we go. Perfect. So in our reports here, here's the list of our standard reports. And here's one of the things I like to stress with people really quickly. Before we actually jump into anything here, what I always tell people is this. Anytime you work with anything with the software, I would always go in with a plan. And what I mean by that is this. Let's say, for example, I'm trying to find a specific kind of report or something to that effect. If that's the case, one of the things that I like to mention really quickly here is I would write down or just kind of think of like, what theme of report would I be looking to see? Do I want to see reports on individual agents? Do I want to see reports on groups, on external phone numbers, whatever that might be? And the reason I say go in with that idea is because that will help you find your reports more easily. This list of reports is rather extensive. In fact, depending on the licenses that you have, you may have access to over 70 different reports, which is kind of crazy, right? So if you are looking for a specific style of report and I know what that is, then that's going to be much, much easier. So if I know that I want to see agent reports, for example, I can do one of two things. I can come up here where it says search and type in the word agent, and that narrows that down for me. Or I can also use the filter tags, which are these items right here. So if I want to see agent reports, it's the same thing. I can just click on agent reports, and that will show me my agent reports. Now, this doesn't completely narrow down. Obviously, that's somewhat specific, but it's not entirely specific. So there is always that opportunity or that chance where I still may need to go through some of these reports. But this is much more manageable than is that original list. Okay. So keep that in mind. You can kind of look for reports or categories of reports, and that will help as you're kind of going through and running the reports. Now, obviously, as you get more familiar with reports, this will be really easy to find. You can find your reports really easily. You can star them. You'll notice next to each report there's a star. You can click on that. Essentially prioritizes the reports to make it easier for you to find those reports. Once I star them, essentially what happens is they will move to the top of the list, so I can find those really easily. Okay. Once I have found the report that I want to run, I select it, and then over here to the right-hand side, I get kind of a sample of what that report might look like. Now, be careful with this. The main idea behind the sample here is to show you the column headers, as the column headers will explain to you what this report is going to give you. Okay. The reason I say be careful is because you might look at this list of names and say, I don't know any of these people. And in addition to that, you might look at these numbers and say, holy cow, those do not add up whatsoever. Right? So keep in mind, this is really just filler information until I actually run that report. Okay. Great. Once I find the report I want to run, down here in the bottom right-hand corner, we have what we call our report runner window. Now, I personally like to refer to these as my questions. Okay, these are the questions I'm going to answer in order to be able to run the report. A lot of times people refer to these as the parameters. Okay. I'm not fancy. I like to say questions just because it's easier for me to remember. But for today's purposes, depending on our time, I may discuss a quote-unquote advanced feature with this. It's not really an advanced feature. It's just something that you can do if necessary. We're going to refer to them as parameters because we're going to talk about those parameters a little bit later, okay, in regards to a few things. But for now, all I have to do is answer my questions to run the report. So it'll always start off with your report time frame. To select my report time frame, I click on the ellipsis here to the far right. And once I do that, it will present to me a little calendar. Now in this calendar, I would essentially just go through and select the date range that I would want to see. That can really be any time from the point that the software was installed up until the present point in time. So let's just say hypothetically, let's say I've gone back, I've had this installed for 2 or 3 years. Can I run it from 2 or 3 years ago? Yeah, as long as it was a time where the software was installed. Now, I'm not going to go back that far, but I can run this for really any amount of time. Let's say I go back to the month of December, and maybe I want to run it for the entire month. If I want to run it for the entire month, all I have to do is select the first day of the time frame and then the last day of the time frame, and that highlights everything in between. Okay, so you get to decide what time frame it is. If I want to do more or less than that, maybe I just want to do a couple days or a day. If I want to see just a day, just select the day. If I want to see a longer time frame, maybe not the whole month, just again select the first day and then the last day, and that highlights everything that you need to see there. Okay, great. Once I've done that, I can go ahead and hit OK, and I've got my time frame selected. Now the next item here is what we call our rows question. Rows, R-O-W-S. This comes into play a little bit more with the custom reports, but rows, just so you guys know, refers to this column right here. Okay, so it's basically asking me, what do you want to see in that column? Now this is an agent report, so in that column it's going to ask me which agents do I want to see. So I can then come in here and open up my ellipsis here. It's going to present to me a window where I can actually approach this in a few different ways. The first way is I can go and select the individual agents just like this. Okay, so if I wanted to just hand select the agents I want to see. The other option is to select roles. Roles essentially are groups. Maybe I want to see a specific group of agents, customer service, for example. If I select customer service as the role, it'll actually go through and select every agent that belongs to customer service, and that's who it's going to display on the report. Okay. All right. So once I've got my agents selected, I now, if I want to, can add charts. Charts are essentially just graphs. Do I want to see a graphical representation of the column or the report itself? And it looks like it's going to prohibit me from doing that. Maybe. Let's try that. There we go. All right. Let's do a little bit more. All right. There we go. So what this allows me to do is it allows me to go through and select a graph or a chart for each column that I would want one to represent. Maybe I want to see a line chart for total calls and a pie chart for answered calls and a bar chart for missed calls, right? So I can go through, and if I wanted to do something like that, I could. Now, once I've got those selected, I can adjust those, okay? Let's see here. Java would like to control this computer using accessibility features. Deny. Okay, we'll see what happens there. All right. So once I've selected my charts and I've got those kind of the way that I want them, at that point, I can then go ahead and hit OK. And there we go. Those are the parameters that I'm going to fill out for this report. Now, there is one other that we're going to see here, and that is report skin. Report skin is a custom report feature. Okay, and what that allows me to do, essentially, it allows me to change the way that the report looks. Now, we're going to talk about adjusting the columns in regards to maybe I want to make changes to the values that are already there. We call that editing a report. We're going to talk about creating a report. So those are the two main things we're going to do with custom reports. Report skin, I like to refer to this feature as what I call the cherry on top. This allows me to change the way the report looks in the sense of I can add my logo, or I can change the colors, I can change the font, whatever I want to do, right? So we've got a couple here that we can show. So here's one that we call our demo skin. It's not exactly pretty, but it illustrates the point, right? So I can go through and I can say, okay, I can add my logo, add my banner, change the colors, whatever I prefer to do. Now, if you want to do that, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this unless you have questions for it. We can kind of talk about that towards the end if you do have questions about it. If I wanted to work with that report skin, all I have to do is click on this ellipsis here, and that will present to me my report skin builder. And what that allows me to do is I can now go through and change anything here that I want to change. So for example, the header color. This is my header color right here. Maybe I want to change that to a different color. And I'm super colorblind, folks. So if this ends up ugly, I'll blame it on that, right? So there I've got my header color changed. Maybe I want to change my row label color. This is the row label color. This and actually this as well. So maybe I want that to be something like that, right? Let's make this look kind of baby showerish. There you have it, right? So I can go through and make those changes to fit what I want to see, right? I can add my logo. I can change anything I want here. And so, like I said, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this today, but it is something that you can do. And if you do have questions about it, we can definitely address those questions. Okay. But because of our time's sake here, I want to make sure that we get through the most important things, which are editing and customizing report from the ground up. So I'll stop for just a second here and just find out, are there any questions about this right now? Okay. Perfect. All right. I'm going to close that. No, I don't want to overwrite that skin, and there we go. All right, so, oops, let's do this actually. Okay, so I've got my report skin. I've got my questions answered. The last thing here to do is to change my format if I want to. By default, I can run this as a PDF, an Excel spreadsheet, HTML, comma separated value. Marcy, I'm not sure if you have a PDF reader on this computer, but let's go ahead and try and run it as a PDF. If not, then we'll try it as an HTML. But I like to run it as PDF, and that's simply because if I add charts to that report, then it will pull up those the PDF will show those charts in that report. Okay. So it may have gone over to another. There we go. So there's our report. It's gorgeous. It really is. You know, it's going to give us everything we need to see there. But we can see up here we have the overall summary. So these are kind of the grand totals. We have down here, this is the individual total, so it shows me how each aid is performing individually. And then, of course, we've got those charts here. So it's not a really telling report. There's not a whole lot of information there. But the good thing is we're seeing, hey, we're not really missing that many calls. Typically I could zoom in on that, but it's oh, there we go. Maybe that'll let me. I don't know. There we go. Okay, so we can see that a little bit better. There we have it. Okay, so that's how I run a report. Really pretty simple. It's just a matter of answering a few questions, and it's going to be the same process for each report, even the reports that I edit and the reports that I customize. Okay, so anytime you make or create a report or edit or create a report, it will be the same process. You'll just answer those parameters or answer those questions, and that allows you to run your report. Okay, any questions on running a report? Okay. All right, let's see here. Let's see if this will let me close this. There we go. Awesome. Well, good. Okay, let's go ahead and get to the fun stuff then. Let's go ahead and talk about custom reports. Okay. Now, for just a minute here, I'm going to come back to the Chronicall main menu, and we're going to talk really quickly about a few things. I'm going to go ahead and come over here to where it says create report. I want to start with creating a report, which honestly is the more time-consuming and more, I don't like to use this word necessarily, but it's kind of more complicated way to build a report. But I like to start here just because it kind of gives us a really good foundation for when we talk about editing a report, which is what we absolutely 100% recommend that you do, if at all possible. Sometimes you can't do that. Sometimes you have to build a new report, and that's totally fine. And this isn't really a difficult process. It's just one of those things that's a little bit more time consuming. So with that said, here's the first thing I like to mention with this. The first thing it's going to ask me to do when I'm building a report or creating a report is to select what style of report it wants or I want it to build. Now I've got a whole list of options here, okay? And these options here allow me to see what kind of report or what styles of report I can build. Now, before we actually do this, I want to talk about a few things. In fact, I want to talk about what we call the categories. Or I guess I should say what I call the categories. There really are only 3 categories of reports. Okay. Now, granted, there's obviously a lot more in this list here. Okay. But each one of these report styles will fit into one of 3 categories. Now, those categories are summary, detailed, and time interval. So let's come back for just a second and talk about each category of report. In the standard reports, let's start with the most common style of report, which is what we call a summary report. Summary reports are actually really, really easy to find in standard reports. And that's because if I type in the word summary here up at the top, it shows me every report that's a summary report because it's in the name of that report. We have a lot of different styles of summary reports. Now, summary reports are just that. It's totals of information. It's going to give me grand totals. So if I want to know how many calls a specific agent or group had, I would use a summary report. Okay, so we can see here Aaron Gonzalez. He had 127 calls, 81 outbound calls, and so on. So it's showing me those totals. Here's my problem when it comes to creating a summary report. This list of options is actually alphabetical, and we'll notice as we get to the essence, there's not an option for summary. So how do I know if a report is going to be a summary style report? Well, that's where I come back here to the rows column on the report. As I click on this, on each of these items, or each of these styles of reports, that rows column will change based upon the style of report that it is. That will help me see what style of report or category of report this is going to be. So for just a second here, I'm going to talk about those categories and kind of what you'll see here. So this might be a little bit more helpful. So again, let's go ahead and start with that summary option, which is the most common. Summary reports If I look in this column, I will see one of a handful of things. I'll give you a list of some of those items. If I ever see a name, now that might be an agent name, it might be a group name, it might be a caller ID name. Okay, if I ever see a name, that is going to be a summary style report. Again, meaning it's going to give me totals of information. Okay, so if I ever see a name, it will be a summary report. If I ever see a call direction, inbound, outbound, internal, that is going to be a summary report as well. If I ever see a phone number, phone numbers indicate a summary report as well. Okay, so names, call directions, phone numbers. If I ever see any of those in this column, that will tell me that this is going to be a summary style report. Again, meaning it's going to show me totals of information. Great. So that's summary. That's that category. The next category is what we call detailed. Now, detailed reports are very helpful. A detailed report is just that. It's going to be more detailed. I'll give you an example of this. Let's take, for example, here we can see agent Aaron Gonzalez had 127 inbound calls. Well, that's great. I'm glad that I can see I can see that he had 127 inbound calls. That's great. But what if I wanted to know more about each one of those calls? Well, this report's not going to do that. It's just telling me, hey, this is how many. Well, if I want to know the details, I would actually use a report like this one right here. Oh, where'd it go? Agent inbound call. Oh, I'm like, well, it's not there. It's because I had summary typed in there. I apologize. Agent inbound calls. In this report here, this is what we call a detailed report. What we would see is we would see Aaron Gonzalez's name right here. And then right here where it says total calls, it said he had 127. Right here it says 124. So we'll just kind of follow this 124. This 124 on a detailed report will actually show me now 124 lines. Each line on this report represents one call. That's why this is a detailed report. It shows me the details for each call that's associated with this agent. Okay. Coming back to the create a report section, one more time, there's not a detailed option. So how do I know again if a report is going to be a detailed report? Well, once again, we're going to look in this column. I apologize, this is going to be a little bit difficult to see just because I can't zoom in on this. But there are three styles or three kinds of detailed reports. By far, the most common is what we call a call report. In this column, we're going to see call ID followed by a number. That's not a phone number. That's not the caller ID. A call ID is a number that's associated with this call in the Chronicall or Xima reporting database. Okay, and I can actually search using this number in Cradle to Grave. This is showing me the details of each call. The other option is event, and you will almost, if ever, never use this. Okay, you're going to see here it says event ID followed by a number. The third option is feature ID followed by a number. The three things that those items have in common is that word ID. If you ever see ID in that column, you will know that this is going to be a detailed report. Okay, so look for the word ID, and that will indicate to you that will show you the details of those calls. All right. The last option is what we call a time interval report. Okay, so in fact, I'll do this instead. I just typed in time, and I'll show you why I did that in just a second there. But I'm going to come over here and actually select this option. So we actually have a title for this, or a category for this. These are time interval reports. These time interval reports are really, at their heart, actually just summary reports. It's summaries of information. However, the way that it's presented in this column is you are not going to see a name, you're not going to see a call direction, and you're not going to see a phone number. What you will see is a time interval. And these time intervals, typically by default, it's hours of day per row, but could also be minutes of hour, months of year, days of week. So you have all these different options here that allow you to see, based upon a time interval, how many calls are taking place. This is what we call the inbound call performance report. This is one of our more popular reports. This allows us to see during certain time intervals, how are certain groups performing with their inbound calls? How many calls are being presented? How many calls are being answered, abandoned? How quickly are they being answered during those times? All right, so this is a really great report to help me to see the overall traffic. Here's the good news. Under Create Report, you're going to see an option here that says Time. those are your time interval reports. Okay, so that one does actually have a category. Okay. So Fam had a question. Which standard report shows the caller ID, or is it custom? There are plenty of reports in our standard reports that do show call ID. All you're gonna have to do is look in this column. The report I was looking at, just in case you're curious about that report, was the agent inbound calls report. Okay, we have all sorts of different detailed reports. This is just an example of one. But you'll just look in that column as you click on the report. Just look in this column, and you'll see if it says call ID. That will be one of those detailed reports. In the create reports section, if I'm going to create a detailed report, it's going to be one of three options: call, event, or feature. And all you're going to do is you're going to look for that word ID in that column. Okay. Hopefully that answers your question. Does that help? Does that help answer your question, Fam? Okay, perfect. Great. Awesome. Well, now that we've gone through and talked about the different styles of reports, like I said, each one of those will fit into one of those categories. So kind of as a recap, time are your time interval reports. Call, event, and feature, those are your detailed reports. Everything else is a summary report. Okay, so like I said, summary reports are the most common. Okay. All right, so let's get to the fun stuff. Let's go ahead and get down to the nitty gritty here. What I would like to do at this point, I'm going to create an agent report. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and hit next here after I select agent. And that now takes me to a window where I can now start adding in the values that I would want to see on this report. This is where I'm going to stop for just 2 seconds, and here's why. To add the columns on my report, all I have to do is hit this button here that says add. The issue with that is I am then presented with this giant list of options for me to choose from. That's great. I have a lot of options that I can choose from. My issue with this is that if I don't have a plan coming into this, then that makes this a much more time-consuming process. So here's my best recommendation for you. What I would typically do is I would open up like a notepad text file or something like that, and I would type out on that paper or on that document what I want to see on this report. And as I type those out, that will make this much easier, because now all I have to do is go through my list of values that I've set, that I've listed in that document or wherever that might be, and I can then start kind of just knocking those off one by one. Okay, but if I just come in here and start saying, okay, like let's see what's available, right? That's fine. You can do that. It's just more time consuming, right? So I'm going to go ahead and create a report that I do on a regular basis, just because this is very, very similar to what people want on a regular basis. So we're going to create an agent report, and typically when we're creating an agent report, we want to see how many calls agents are involved with, right? So I'm going to start off with inbound calls. How many inbound calls has an agent been associated with? Now, there's actually a couple ways we can do that, but I'll show you the easiest way. Up here where it says search, I'm going to type in that word inbound, if I can spell it correctly. There it is. There's inbound calls. Now I can select that, and if I want to, I can click on this description tab, and it should give me a description of what that means, just so I know, right? Inbound call count, what that essentially is calls that are coming in. So these are your clients calling in, okay? So inbound calls, I don't really need to change anything there. I'm going to go ahead and leave that as is, and then hit OK. And boom, there it is on my report, okay? Let's hit add again. Now, I also want to see how many calls my agents are involved with outbound. How many calls have they made outbound? Now, you may not care about that. Some companies do. So I'm going to go ahead and just type that in and add that to my report, because I want to know how many are they making, or how many are they receiving, and how many are they making. So there's outbound call count right there. Again, same thing. I don't really need to change that, but if I want to know what that means, again, I can click on description and it will show me. Hit OK. Again, boom, it's on my report. Let's do another one. Let's go ahead and hit add. This is now where it starts getting not complicated, but where it's going to require a little bit more work. So I've got a total of inbound calls and outbound calls. Now I want to total those two together. So I'm going to use an option called call count. Call count is actually probably the most versatile feature in here, because you can do a lot with it. But really, all I want with this one is just to give me a grand total of calls. So if I look at description here, what does this show me? Well, call count shows the total number of calls, inbound, outbound, and internal, associated with the given agent. Well, one thing I did not add to this report is internal calls. So I don't want this to count internal calls. I just want it to count inbound and outbound. So this is where I'm now going to go through and make a few changes. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and call this total call. There we go. Okay. From there, I now have these filters that I can use to actually define what I want this to mean for me. Now we've got a couple different levels here. We've got our general criteria. I actually don't use that one very frequently. I might, if I have some time, I'll show you something there. Event level shows me where I can add events to calls or calls that have specific events or that involve specific groups, things like that. I'm going to come down here to this call level one. Call level is the most advanced aspect of this, and although it's advanced, there's some things that are pretty basic here. Things like call direction. So if I open up call direction here, I can see here it's currently counting all call directions. But remember, I don't care about the internal option. So I'm actually going to go ahead and select inbound and outbound, and then hit OK, and then hit OK, and that's it. Now it's total call count, yes, but it's only counting inbound and outbound calls. It's excluding those internal calls. Okay? So that's where it starts to get a little bit more time consuming. Now, not that that was difficult or anything, and it didn't really take that long, but at this point, we can now start being more specific, right? And you can obviously start doing that right off the bat if you want to. But it can be more time consuming, but it's really actually not that difficult. Now, I'm going to add a couple more here, but before I do that, are there any questions on this so far? Okay. All right. Well, let's keep going then. Let's go ahead and hit add again. And this time, what I want to see is I want to see how many calls my agents are answering. My issue with that is I only want this to count calls if it was answered within less than 10 seconds. Now, I don't currently have a less than 10 seconds option here. Okay, so I'm going to do this really easily. I'm going to come here where it says answered calls, and then I'm actually going to change the name so that I know what this is reflecting. We're going to go ahead and say less than 10. Let me make sure that I do that correctly there. Okay, so less than 10 seconds. Under my criteria here now, I can now come down and scroll down and say, okay, speed of answer is less than or equal to, I'll give them that benefit, less than or equal to 10 seconds. Okay, so there's my new value. So it's going to count all calls that were answered. Now, you might ask, okay, well, what is actually an answer call? What constitutes an answer call? If I come over here to the description, you'll see an answer call is a call, an inbound call that included at least one talking event with the given agent, meaning that agent answered that call. Okay, so again, that's great. That's my definition too, but I only want it to count if it was answered again within those less than 10 seconds. Okay, so that's why I set that feature right there. Now we can hit OK. Great, answered less than 10 seconds. I'm going to do something really easy here. I also want to know how many calls were answered after 10 seconds. Okay, so there's that answered less than 10 seconds. I'm actually going to go ahead and say duplicate. I'll come over to this one now and say edit. And I'm going to go ahead and change that name just a little bit. We're going to go ahead and say greater than 10 seconds. Oops, greater than 10 seconds. We'll go ahead and get rid of that word copy as well. Okay, and now all I have to do is scroll down to the bottom and make that quick change. So we're going to go ahead and change this to greater than 10 seconds. There we go. Really easy. Okay, let's get a little bit more complicated. Maybe one of the other things I want to see is I want to see how many inbound calls this agent had where there was a talking event, but that talking event was greater than 3 minutes. So we're going to go ahead and do this. Again, we want to see how many inbound calls that agent had. So let's go ahead and type in inbound again, inbound call count. But what we can do now is we can go ahead and change this to reflect my specific value. Inbound call with talk. I would never actually type this out. It's a long title. With talk. Well, I would, I guess. Greater than 3 minutes. There we go. So that's a really long title, but that's what this is showing. So I've already got inbound calls selected, right? That's the value I'm already using. So that part's done, inbound calls. But what about this last portion, with talk event greater than 3 minutes? Well, now I need to come down here where it says event level, event type. I want to make sure that this call actually has a specific event type, and that event type is talking. So I'll go ahead and here and find talking. There we go. Great. So we've got inbound call with a talking event. That's done. What about this last portion with a talking event greater than 3 minutes? Well, we're going to scroll down here under the advanced or the call level features, and we're going to use one called event duration. I want this to look at the specific event that I've selected, and that talking event is, or that event is talking, right? So event duration greater than or equal to 3 minutes. Okay, so obviously that one's a little more, I guess you could say, complex. It's not difficult, but you have so much flexibility with these values here. You have so much. You can do so much with these. Okay. I'm going to show you one more, but just to be safe, any questions up to this point? Okay. Let's do one more, and that is going to be kind of an odd one. What if I can't find exactly what I'm looking for? Maybe I have some close things, but maybe what I want to see. Let's take, for example, this. I want to see, out of the calls that are answered, what percent of them are being answered within less than 10 seconds. Now, there actually is a really easy way I could do that, but I'm not going to show you that. I'm not going to show you the easy way. I'm going to show you a little more complicated way because I want you guys to know that you can do this and show you kind of an example of how to do it. Down here, I have a button that says Add Formula or Add FX. If I click on that, that opens up a new window where I can now come in here and build my own. So we're going to go ahead and call this, let's call this Blake's Service Level Agreement, my SLA. So typically a service level agreement is your agents have to answer those calls within a specific amount of time, which is kind of what we've already talked about. Okay, so here's my SLA. Let's go ahead and say add here, and I'm now going to add the values that I would like to use to create my formula. So we'll go ahead and say add, and I'm going to start with answered calls. Okay, so there's answered calls right there. I'll click on that, and now I can come over here and adjust this, right? So what I want to do is I want to divide answered calls in less than 10 seconds by calls that were answered. Okay, because I want to know out of the calls that were answered, what percent of them were answered within less than 10 seconds. So answered, we're going to go ahead and say less 10. Unfortunately, in these formulas, it won't let me use that less than symbol, which is kind of weird. But we're going to go ahead and scroll down here, and we're going to go ahead and say speed of answer, again, less than or equal to 10 seconds. There we go, great. So there's my first value that I'm going to use to build my formula. Okay. Well, now I need that to be compared against something. So let's go ahead and hit add again. And that's honestly just going to be answered calls. I'm not actually going to change anything there. I'm just going to leave that as is. Then we'll hit OK. Great. So there are my two values. Now I can build my formula. Value 0 is answered calls in less than 10 seconds, and value 1 is answered calls. Now these little dollar symbols, it's a coding item, but the way I like to look at it is that just represents the beginning of a new value. Now all I want to do is divide those two by each other. So I'm going to go ahead and say divided by 0 divided by 1. There we have it. And now I can also choose how I want that to display. I can have it be a duration, a number, a percent, text, true, false. If I select one of these and it does not work, it doesn't apply, it will tell me. I'll show you where it will tell me in just a second here. But for this, we're going to go ahead and say percent. Then I can hit test formula, and this is where it will tell me if it works or if it doesn't. So if I hit test formula, it says formula is valid, great, we're good to go. If it doesn't work, it'll say error, and it will show you what the error is. Okay, but there is my new formula. I've got it created. I can go ahead and hit OK now, and now I can go ahead and add it to this report. The nice thing about creating formulas is I can actually add it to this report, sure, but I can actually add it to any other report that I create from this point on. So I'll go ahead and say OK, and now that Blake's service level formula is there for me to see on this report. And again, in the future, if I want to add that to another report, I can see it's there for me right there. Okay, so that is how I build a report. Now, we're not completely done yet. That's a great question, Fam. Fam's question is, do you have a formula chart or a cheat sheet that can be used? Unfortunately, no. I wish we did because I would love to use that myself. Our support staff is typically the formula champions. And so if you ever are trying to build a report and that formula doesn't work, then you can always reach out to our support staff and they can help you get the correct formula. But unfortunately, no, we don't have a cheat sheet. But that is something that maybe we should look into doing. I use that specific value because that's one of the things we get asked for most often. Okay, but you know, that's a great suggestion. I can definitely pass it along to our product team. So, yeah, great question. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Any other questions? Okay. Now, once I've built my formula, I've built my report with the values I want to see. I can come down here and hit next, and that takes me to another window. And this window here is basically referring to that overall summary that was at the top of some of those reports, right? So if I come back to the run reports here, I can see that most reports, not all of them, but most of them will have this overall summary. Okay, that overall summary That's what that's asking me if I want to add here. So I don't have to, right? But a lot of times I really like to see that information. Sometimes I just need a quick view, quick glance about how, how they're, or what's going on, right? So I can come through here, inbound call count. Okay, yeah, I want to see total inbound call count. That totals that all together. Total outbound call count. And then I can go through and do everything else I want to. Total call count, total answered less than 10, total answered greater than 10. And you'll notice as I select them, it just builds them at the top of that report as I go along. Okay, so there's my overall summary. Now I can come down here and hit next again, and it's going to say, all right, well, what do you want to call this report? Well, I'm going to call this Blake's Custom, right? Because that's my report, or Blake's Agent Report, or something like that. Let's see if it catches up. Agent Report. Hopefully I didn't spell anything wrong. Okay. Once I've given this a name, I can then go through and choose the orientation. By default, it'll be portrait. I can have that be landscape if I prefer. Okay, but we'll go ahead and leave it with portrait. And then the last option here is my default parameter values. Parameter values, if you remember, are referring to this window down here. It's asking me, hey, what do you want to see on this report, or which agents, what time frame? It's allowing me to do that right here, right now, if I want to. Now, maybe I'm not ready to run this report, and I can just say, no, we're good, finish, and move on. But if I am ready to run this report, I can go ahead and actually just do this stuff right now. Let's go ahead and select my report time frame. We'll see this week so far. Okay, which agents? We'll go ahead and open this up. As this is an agent report, we'll select which agents we would want to see here. I'll just select a handful of them. Conveniently, they're all at the top of the list here, something like that. Great. And then here's the other thing that I like to mention with custom reports. With custom reports, you do have the ability as well to sort the report. By default, if I'm doing an agent report, it'll be by agent name ascending, so A to Z, right? Maybe I want that descending, Z to A, so I can switch that if I want to. Maybe I don't want to do it by agent. Maybe I want to do it by how many agent, or who has answered the most calls in less than 10 seconds. So I'll do descending by answering less than 10, right? Because it'll show the highest number at the top. Okay, so you can do something like that if you want to. You can add those charts. If you want to add a report skin, you can. Otherwise, I would just go ahead and hit finish. And that report that I just created is now going to be in the list of my standard reports. Okay, so we'll see that pop up here in just a second, which I can now run and schedule just like I would any other report. Here's the good thing about this. It's all ready to go. Now I can just go ahead and hit run report. Marcy, that might pop up on your other screen, so I might need to have you grab that and pull that over. But that report that I've just created is now available for me to use anytime I want to and anytime I need to. Okay, so there it is. There's my report. We'll go ahead and make that a little bit bigger here. There we go. Awesome. So we can see my overall summary. There's my grand totals. It looks like it totals up to 100%. At this point, though, I can see here's each of my agents and how they're performing individually. Okay, so the average service level agreement is 100%. And that's just basically totaling that all together and then dividing it. Okay, so that is how I create a report. Right? Great. Now, here's the deal. Create as many reports as you want. That's perfectly fine. But what we have happen a lot is people will call into us. In fact, I was on a training this morning and someone had tried to build a report and it just didn't quite work. And so what we typically tell people is this: try building the report first, and then after you've tried to build that report, if it doesn't work for you, of course, you can reach out to our support staff. Okay. Now, here's what will happen most likely. If you call into our support staff and say, hey, I need help building a report, they'll say, okay, well, what are you wanting to see on that report? And you'll tell them what you want to see, and they'll say, okay, great. Let me show you a report that already exists that does all of that already. Right? So they'll come here to list and show you the report that you're looking for. Or they'll say, we have a report that's really close. We would just need to make a few adjustments. Right? So this report here, my agent report, shows me inbound calls, outbound calls, total calls, answered calls, and so forth. Well, we actually have a report. We've actually already kind of seen this. That agent call summary report is really similar to that report. Right? Inbound calls, outbound calls. There are a couple changes we would need to make to it, but the nice thing is, from here, I can go ahead, right-click on that report, and now I can go ahead and say Edit Report, which then gives me the ability to edit a copy or edit the original. Typically, I would ask people what they would think I would recommend, but everybody kind of has a different opinion on this. I always say, edit a copy. I don't trust myself to never need that original again. That's just me. If you want to edit the original, by all means, go for it. That's totally fine. but I always just recommend editing a copy because that way I can go back to the original and refer to the original in the future if I need to. Okay. So here's that report. The nice thing about this is as I edit a copy, it'll say copy of agent call summary, so I can see that it's a copy of it. But here I've already got that foundation. It's already got inbound calls. It's already got outbound calls. It has internal calls, and I don't want that. So I'm going to go ahead and select that and say remove. Yeah, are you sure you want to do this? Yes, let's get rid of that. Awesome. Total calls. I'm going to edit total calls because remember, by default, total calls looks at all call directions. And I just have inbound and outbound. So I'm going to come through here now and just make a quick adjustment. So under call level, call direction, we're going to switch this to inbound and outbound. Great. Hit OK, hit OK again. Awesome. That's now changed. Answered calls is already there for me. Again, all I have to do is edit that value so it reflects my specific value. So we're going to go ahead and say answered less than 10. And now I can come down here to the bottom and I can go ahead and make that change. Speed of answer less than or equal to 10 seconds. Okay, great. Now, what I didn't do is I did not add answered in greater than 10 seconds. So once again, I'll just select that and I'll say duplicate. There it is down at the bottom. I can now go through again and make those small changes. Right, so I'm not going to go through and edit this whole report, but the basic idea is if you want to create a report, you are more than welcome to. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But the easier way to approach this is to actually go through and just edit an existing reports because most of the time you actually will be able to find a report that that closely matches what it is that you're looking for. Okay, so I'll go ahead and make that one small change. In fact, I don't want greater than or equal to, I just want greater than. There we go. Okay, so I could go through. In fact, I will add one last item. I do want to add that formula that I created, and there we go. Okay, so that's basically the same report with a few differences, right? Like I said, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. Okay, so once I've edited that report, I can then come down here and hit next again. And honestly, from this point, it's the same thing. Remember that overall summary? It's going to say, hey, this is what we've already got selected. You've added a few things. Do you want to add that to the report? Sure. Let's go ahead and say total answered less than 10 or greater than 10, excuse me, and the average service level agreement. Right. So I can add those, and then from there I hit next. It's going to say, hey, what do you want to call this? You can go ahead and leave this called copy of the agent call summary. I can do those parameters if I want to. For now, I'll just go ahead and hit finish. And that allows me to now run this report and schedule this report again, just like I would any other report. So it is easier to edit an existing report than it is to create a report from the ground up, but you can do that either way, whichever way works best for you. Okay, great. Any questions on creating or editing reports? Okay. All right, let's see here. So Fab's question: if a report gets changed that you did not make or deleted, can we reset or restore it and even a standard report? Also, how often does it get updated? If you're referring to the updates of the software, is that what you're referring to, or just the software updates? That kind of ranges from year to year. We usually do what we call maintenance builds 2 to 3 times a year. But actual main updates for the software happens about once every year, once every other year or so. Okay, so it's not super frequent. So that's that portion of that. In regards to the reports themselves, if a report gets deleted or changed, if it is a standard report, if it's one of those canned reports that comes with the software, yes, we absolutely can go through and just essentially re-import that report for you. Okay, so you absolutely, if you do accidentally change an original and you need it back, we absolutely can do that. No big deal. Or if it gets deleted, same thing. If it's a custom report, that's obvious. That's a little more difficult. If it's a custom report that gets deleted, unfortunately, we can't restore that one because it has been deleted. Okay, but if it's a standard report, if it's a canned report that comes with the software, then yes, we can restore those if they get deleted or get changed. Okay. Hopefully that helps answer your question for you. Okay. All right. I do want to show you one last thing here. We've got about 4 minutes left. I do want to show you one last thing, and that has to do with these parameters. It's what I like to refer to as an advanced feature. It's not necessarily one that you're going to use on a regular basis. Okay. But it is something that I want to show you because you may have to at some point. And typically, Typically, this is going to be done when you're creating a detailed report, right? So we've created a summary report. I want to come back here really quick. Let's go ahead and close this. I want to create a detailed report just really quickly because I want to show you really two things. So we'll go ahead and say create report again, and this time we're going to do a call report. Now what happens is once I hit next, it actually takes me to a window that we have not seen before. Okay, we will actually skip this for now, and we'll come back to it in a second, and that's where I'm going to show you the advanced feature. But I'm going to show you first why we need this advanced feature. So I'll hit next again, and now I can go through and build my report. Now I will mention this, and I may have mentioned it earlier. I don't feel like I did, so I'm going to repeat this just in case I didn't mention this. The values that you see in this list are dependent on the style of report you are creating. Some reports will have similar items, but most reports are going to have specific values that you can choose from based upon the style of report it is. Okay, so what I see here in this list for call detail report may not be the exact same thing that I see in agent reports or in group reports. Some of them, like I said, will be similar, but the style of the report will vary. These will vary based upon the style of report that it is that I'm creating. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and do a really simple one. Let's do something like call ID. Let's do caller ID. There we go. That's what I want to see. I want to see the name of the person calling in, right? I'm going to go ahead and hit add again. Let's do something like external number. External number shows me that person's, or external party shows me that person's phone number, because I want to know who they are and what their number is, right? In case I need to call them back or something. I want to see, is that call answered? We're going to go ahead and select that option there, is answered. It will say, it'll show a check mark. Depending on how I run the report, if it's in a PDF, it's usually a check mark. If it's like a HTML, sometimes it'll say true or false. Okay, it kind of just depends on the style of the report that I run, right? Let's add maybe two more items. Let's do US, city, and state. And when I say US, city, and state, I do also like to mention with that is not strictly for the US. It should, in my personal opinion, it should be called location. And that's just because it's not limited to US, city, and states. Okay, so it can be provinces, it can be counties, it can be cities, whatever it is, just depend on where you're located. Okay, and let's do one more. Let's do start time. I like to do start time because it allows me to see when they called in and what date they called in and what time they called in. Okay, so that's the default format. Okay, so there we go. So there's my report, best one ever, beautiful. At this point, I'll go ahead and hit next. And then from there, it's going to say, hey, do you want to add that overall summary? You know, I really just want to do row count, and I'll show you why in just a few minutes here. Let's go ahead and hit next again. And we're going to go ahead and call this Blake's detailed, or we'll just call this Blake's new report. Here we go, just for time's sake here. And we'll go ahead and hit finish. Here's my problem with this, and here's why I want to show you an advanced feature. That report that I just created, while it's the best report I've ever created, my issue with this is when I go to run it. Report time frame. Great, yeah, we can do that, easy. Let's see again this week so far. Here's where I stop though. The next option here for me is charts. It doesn't ask me which group or which agents. In other words, who's this report running on? Well, as it stands right now, it's running on everyone, every group, every agent. And that may be exactly what you want. And if so, great, you're good. But if by chance you do want that option to select specific agents or specific groups, something like that, that option does not currently exist. So let's create that option. I'm going to come back up here and right click on this report, and we're going to edit this report. Now, because it's a customized report, it's not going to ask me if I want to edit the original or a copy. Okay, so it's just going to go directly to the report. It takes us here to that window we skipped. This text was not there earlier. Okay, so that wasn't there. It used to be blank. But it takes us to this window where we can now choose some filters. So I'm going to go ahead and say add filter. And there's actually a couple things I want to do here so I can illustrate a few points. The first thing I can do here is I can set a specific filter for this report. Let me give you an example. By default, if I were to run this report, it would look at every call, regardless of call direction, inbound, outbound, internal. It'll look at every call. Well, I only want this to look at inbound calls. So right here where it says call direction, I'm going to statically set this at inbound. So that way it'll only ever look at inbound calls or only ever report on inbound calls. Now, my second option here is this. I want to run it for inbound calls, yes, but I want to run it for inbound calls for specific agents. So if I wanted to do that, there's actually two ways. Up here where it says agent, I can click on this ellipsis tool, which would then open my list of agents, and I could go through and say, these agents here. My problem with that is if I go ahead and select these agents and then hit OK, and then finish this report will only ever look at those 4 agents, which may be exactly what I want. But there's a good chance that, let's say, for example, I want to run it right now for these 4 agents, but later on down the road, I want to run it for these other 5 or 6 agents. Well, if I set these agents here, hit OK, and finish this report, it'll only look at those agents. So I don't want to do that, because what would happen is if I did want to add other agents, I'd have to either A, create a separate report, or B, edit this report every time I go to run it. And I don't want to do that. So I'm not going to select people this way. I'm actually going to go ahead and cancel this. What I'm going to do instead is right here where it says agent, just to the right of it, I'm going to right click in there, and I'm going to say create new parameter. And I can go ahead and leave it called agent. I can call it whatever I want, but I'll go ahead and hit OK there. And that's it. Okay, so I've added 2 new things. A, this will statically only ever look at inbound calls. B, I've now just created a new parameter, and I'll show you what happens now. Now I can go ahead and hit next. It takes me to my list of values for the report. I'm good there, so I'm done. I'll go ahead and hit next again. Now it takes me to another window that we've not yet seen. I'll come back to this one in about 2 minutes. Okay, we're going to skip it for right now. We'll go ahead and hit next, and finish. Great. Now my report's done. The difference now is this. A, when I go to run this report, it'll only report on inbound calls. B, first I'm going to come in here and select my time frame. But what we'll also notice is I now have the option to select agents. That was not there originally. So now I can go ahead and come in here and run this on any agents that I want to. Okay, great. Once I'm done with that, I can hit report, and now that's what will show. It'll only show inbound calls, excuse me, for those selected agents. Now I actually have one more problem that I'm going to address here in just a second. And Marcy, you're going to have to pull that over for me one more time. Actually, 2 more times in just a second here. Okay, oops, there we go. I think we accidentally ran it twice. Okay, there we go. There's our report. Awesome. So here's my new report. We can now see, here are the reports for all of those agents. It shows me who the call was. So these are all inbound calls. I can see, is that call answered? This one means it was not answered. Okay. My one issue now is this. I do know it's running on those specific selected agents. My issue, though, is I don't know which agents are involved with which calls. Now, I really have 2 things I can do with that. I'm going to go ahead and actually minimize this for just right now. Oh, there's that report again. Let's go ahead and close that one. Okay. My issue with this is I don't know which agents are involved with which calls. So again, I'm going to come back in here one last time and edit this report. And there's really kind of 2 ways I can approach this. Option number 1 is a little bit easier, I guess you could say, and that is I could actually add a column here for receiving agent. Okay. I could do that, but I'm not going to. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to come to that second window that I skipped. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to subgroup this report. Right now, it's not subgrouped. But if I hit agent here, what you'll notice, keep your eye on this over here. What happens is when I select agent, it actually will break that down by agent for me. So it essentially creates mini reports for each agent within the report. So if I do that, let's go ahead and hit next again, and finish. Now, once I've got that set, I'm going to go ahead and be able to run that report again. And this time, we'll see it with its agents involved. So I'm going to go ahead and select those specific agents again. Let's go ahead and just select the customer service role. And we're going to go ahead and switch this to false. You'll most likely want this to say false. And the reason why is because if I leave this at true, when I run this report, all it will show me is the agent name, and then this right here, how many calls they had. That's not as helpful. I want to see the details for those calls, so I put that to false. And we'll go ahead and run this one last time, and then we'll go ahead and finish up here. But I wanted to show you what this does now. So Marcy, if you'll just pull this over one last time. Okay. Here we have that same report. That's the exact same report that we just saw, only now it's broken down by agent for me, right? So I can see agent by agent which calls they individually were involved with. And I like doing it this way better because while I can add a column for agent, receiving agent, that's fine. But what I like to do instead is I like to be able to see it broken down by agent for me. So I can see each of the calls that each agent is associated with. Okay. So you may not have to do that. You may want to, but you don't have to. Okay. I'm not sure what happened there, but that's what we refer to as creating a parameter and creating a subgroup within a report. Okay. Any questions there? Okay. Any questions about anything we've discussed today? Okay. Well, everyone, I hope that this has been helpful. I do apologize about those technical difficulties we had at the beginning, but look, we got it taken care of, so that's good. If you do have further questions, of course, you can always reach out to our support staff when you're building those reports. They'd be happy to help you. Additionally, I did record this presentation, so before we finish up here, if you want a copy of this presentation, just go ahead and put your email into the GoToMeeting chat box so that I have a record of that so I can see who wants the recording, and I will go ahead and convert that and send that over either a little bit later today or tomorrow morning. Okay, because it does take a little bit of time to convert. Anyway, so if you do want that, like I said, just put your name and your email in the text box here or the chat box, and we'll go ahead and send that over to you a little bit later. Other than that, if there are no further questions, everybody, thank you so much for your time and have yourselves a fantastic afternoon.